All right. I'm going to kick it off. We may have some more folks join us today. Again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. I'm so excited to welcome you all to day two of the Arts Alliance Help Desk series on expanding creative businesses and nonprofits. My name is Jess. I am the Public Funding Communications Manager here at Arts Alliance, and this program is supported by the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to help the creative sector in Illinois expand and thrive. As I said, this is day two of our series. Last month, we had a series focused for creative businesses. You can check out recordings of those webinars on the Arts Alliance YouTube channel. And this program, as well as the other programs taking place this week, all about creative nonprofits, will be recorded and uploaded to that channel as well. For those who are going to need ASL interpretation today, you should see our two wonderful ASL interpreters pinned to your screen. If for some reason you're not able to see them spotlit, please use the three dots on the upper right of their Zoom screen to pin them as needed. I want to go over before we get into the reason that you all are here, our amazing experts and panelists and fellow creatives sharing their wisdom, the plan for the day. So we'll go over a quick overview of Arts Alliance Illinois. For some of you, this may be your first program with us. For some of you, you are seasoned pros, but just want to share a little bit about what it is that we do. And then we'll pass it over to our two wonderful presenters to go over some key tips and tricks about operations and insurance for your creative nonprofit. We really want to hear from you all throughout the program. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do share your reactions in the chat, use that Q&A. We will have some time at the end, as you can see here, for open questions about what is coming up for all of you, but we really want to hear from you all throughout. So definitely make use of those Zoom functions. For those of you that might be new to Arts Alliance, I am really excited to share a little bit about all of the incredible work that we do. Arts Alliance is a statewide advocacy organization. We work to build the creative sector's power through several different levers, through advocacy, through policy change, and through connection to resources to improve the quality of life for communities across the state of Illinois and across disciplines. The arts, as you all are representing here, I love to see all of the different disciplines as well as folks from all over Illinois, downstate, as well as Chicago representation. We're really excited that our membership at Arts Alliance really represents a span, not just of geographies, but also of creative disciplines. Arts Alliance does a lot of really incredible work, in particular throughout the pandemic. We do advocacy and policy work, including fighting for and winning COVID relief funding for the arts and culture sector in Illinois. We do research on the creative sector, trying to understand where those gaps in resources are. And we also do direct technical assistance work, and that's where the help desk putting on today's program comes in. We have this amazing program that launched in the past couple of years to provide direct support to creatives to navigate the world of public funding, government funds. And throughout all of that, we're really working to make sure that institutions and individuals in the arts and culture sector can thrive. Our help desk does programs like the one you are attending here today. We also have individual staff members who can help support you in finding and identifying, and sometimes depending on the program, even applying for specific public funding opportunities for the arts. So you can visit our site, the link you can see on the page, and I'll drop that in the chat shortly to chat with one of our staff members one-on-one. We also have a running list of public funding opportunities for the arts. So really just a lot of incredible resources. And our program today, as I mentioned, is part of a series that we're holding throughout the summer to give creative business owners and creative nonprofits the resources you need to start, grow, and then sustain your creative work. Our previous series, as I mentioned, is on YouTube. Stay tuned for some more upcoming really exciting program in September, which is more focused on sort of growing and sustaining your creative nonprofit. And we'll have lots more incredible panelists and creatives, fellow artists, etc., who will be a part of that. I also want to plug a workshop we're having next Wednesday with the fine folks at BDO, which is all about thinking about equity and inclusion in your financial planning as an arts nonprofit. It's going to be a really fascinating and important conversation. So I'll drop links in the chat to be able to sign up for that. One other really good way to make sure you're staying in the loop with all of the help desk resources and programming is to sign up for the Arts Alliance newsletter. So check that out if you are not a subscriber already. Now, I know the reason you all are here is not to hear about upcoming workshops, even though I would be excited to see you at some in the future and hope you will join us for the rest of the series tomorrow. You're really here to hear the expertise and the wisdom from our panelists. So I'm going to kick it off by passing it over to Jillian Gora from BDO to introduce ourselves and start our program for the day.
Thanks so much, Jess. Let me just share my screen and get us started here. I am also really excited to be here today talking to you about financial operational excellence. Of course, today is just going to be a little bit of a taste, and I hope that you continue to watch the Arts Alliance website and newsletters for future workshops coming up. I think we're going to have an opportunity to dig further into adapting your finance office in a virtual world, so we can talk a little bit more about operations then. As just said, my name is Jillian Gora. I'm a senior consultant with BDO. BDO is a really large accounting firm, and I work in a department within that accounting firm called the Nonprofit and Grantmaker Advisory. So we work exclusively with nonprofit organizations and funders, so philanthropic organizations as well. And we work to strengthen capacity in fiscal and operational management. We do that by doing really standard and technical consulting projects with nonprofits. We do a lot of financial management coaching, obviously training, which is what I'm here joining you with today. And we also offer outsourced services. So we can come in and even be your back office for your nonprofit. So I'm excited to be here with you. I use she, her pronouns. Now I want to know a little bit about who's here with us today. So Jess is going to launch a poll for us. This poll should have 2 questions. I'm curious why you showed up today. Maybe you're starting to think about starting your own nonprofit. Maybe you've recently joined a nonprofit or you started working at a nonprofit. Maybe you've been around nonprofits for a while, but you're here just to get some confirmation. Just curious why you're here today. And also wondering if you are representing a nonprofit today, what's the budget size of that nonprofit? So I'd love for you to answer these 2 questions, and then we'll have Jess share the results up on the screen.
Great. I'll just give it one more second. It looks like we have 10 of 12 folks participating. Final chance to get your answers in here, folks. All right. Let's see.
Great. Thanks, Jess. So a good number of you, maybe 50% of you here, are not new to nonprofits, but just showing up for additional information, which I think is really great. I really want to welcome all of you here, but especially those of you that are new to nonprofits. Maybe you are just starting to work in a nonprofit and joining us here to learn some more, or maybe you're starting about starting your own nonprofit, which is great. Those of you that are representing organizations today, we see that there's a nice spread really in the room of organizations with fairly small budget sizes, less than $50,000, all the way up to organizations that are more than $500,000, and that could really range, obviously. A few folks are in the room here trying to get something else and have answered that they're, it's maybe not applicable for budget size, but this is really helpful to see who's in the room, not only in terms of how I'm talking to you today, but for you all, just to kind of understand who your peers are. I also want to echo Jessica's encouragement to please use that chat liberally if you have questions or thoughts, or even just want to share your own experience as we're going through. So thanks for doing that. So today we're going to talk about financial operations at a nonprofit organization. BDO really feels that operations are made up of these 3 things here. We've got the people, first and foremost, that are doing the work, our teams that are moving through our processes every day, and doing all of our financial management. We also have the systems that we're using. And today, that really largely means technology. What technology, what softwares are we employing in our fiscal offices to help with automation and move things along? And of course, that leans into both the people and the technology that we're using are going to help inform the workflows that we're also employing in our nonprofit finance office. So we really want to see a fiscal office that is effective, meaning that the financial operations are going to really ensure that plans that you've made are being executed properly and that they're based on reliable financial information. So we have all three of these components here to help us out. One of the frameworks that I wanted to introduce to you today is this framework that we use when we talk about levels of financial management. I think this framework is also really helpful because it can be applied to really any department, any nation. We really see financial and other types of management falling into three tiers. The first one is going to be strategic, the strategic level of financial management. So when we think about this level, we're thinking about, sorry, everybody, who is conducting planning, budgeting, right? Forecasting how the year might end, who's reviewing reports for input on strategic decision making or course correcting where you are in your planning, who's providing oversight and vision to the whole team and the fiscal operations. The next level here is that managerial level, as we see. And that managerial level is really going to be about maintaining fiscal policies and procedures. Right? At this level of financial management, we're thinking about overseeing internal controls, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, ensuring compliance with any number of laws that we have to be compliant to, but also to the agreements that we've made with our funders and various groups of stakeholders. In this managerial level, that might include things like performing the monthly close of your books and bank reconciliation. This level is also really about ensuring general ledger quality. And the general ledger is really the record of our bookkeeping, all the transactions that we're entering into our book. We want to make sure that our data is going into our system accurately and in a timely manner. Also, a managerial function. At this level, the folks that are really working at this level are generating financial reports. There may be monitoring cash flow at the organization. And if you're in an organization that is meeting the thresholds to either have an independent review or an audit, usually folks working regularly at this managerial level are going to be overseeing that audit process or that review process as well. And then we have the transactional level of management. And this is pretty much what it sounds like. These are the folks or the people with these responsibilities are, processing accounts payable or accounts receivable, right? The cash disbursements, the cash receipts, doing that day-to-day transactional work like creating invoices, maybe processing and submitting payroll, maintaining accounting files, things of that nature. Now, what happens here is we often see a lot of time and effort being spent at that transactional level, right? So we've got a lot of our time and effort going into just getting the data in the books and organized in a useful way. And it kind of leaves less time for that managerial, the policy and procedure area, and even less time sometimes for that strategic oversight and forward thinking. What we really want to try and set up is a finance office that can kind of reverse that flow. Ideally, and often with a lot of automation, when we can think about it that way, we really want to figure out how to spend less time at that transactional level to free our organizations up to spend more time thinking about creating and maintaining policy, and even more time analyzing the data that we've captured in order to make strategically informed financial decisions. So these are just some good frameworks to think about as you're setting up or working in a finance office or really any other department in an organization, really thinking about where is the most time being spent and how can we potentially shift it so that we're really putting a lot of time into that strategic arm of our work. Another way to think about responsibilities in your finance office is to kind of divide them in this way. So this also helps. Now I'm talking about people, right? Staffing. This really helps us think about how we might staff our finance office in a nonprofit organization. There's different buckets of work that need to be done. The first you see here on the left is controllership. So again, this is about that general ledger quality. And we've probably all heard that term controller or even maybe comptroller, which the government still uses. It's that person that's watching to make sure that we're accurate, to make sure that we're actually following the policies and procedures that we have, right? So there's that level of work in our finance office, really thinking about getting the work done timely and accurately. We also have work to do in this area of planning and performance management. A lot of our work in nonprofit financial management is spent in budgeting, various types of budgets. We're going to talk, I think, a little bit about that in tomorrow's programming. Um, and also monitoring. How are we doing against our budgets, right? So we're really creating plans that ideally are aligned with the strategic vision of our organization, and then setting up mechanisms to help us watch as we're going along. How are we faring against our plans? Do we need to course correct? Do we need to think about a couple of different scenarios that might actually be occurring in the future and be ready to pull whatever levers we can depending on which scenario comes to fruition? Then another area of financial management work at our nonprofit organizations is really around compliance and grants management. Fundraising is a huge part of what we do in the nonprofit sector. And often funds that are coming to us come with deliverables that we've promised our funders and any kind of other agreements or ways that we should be, whether it's reports, certain milestones, level of service, right, that we're doing. And if you're an organization that is funded in any amount by the government, or if that's something that you're looking to grow is government funding, this is a really important area as well, because there's a lot of compliance requirements that come with government funding. So as you're thinking about skill sets that you might need in your nonprofit finance office and support, maybe different levels of support, this is a good way to look at it as well. I did want to spend a couple of minutes talking about roles and responsibilities at the leadership level when we're thinking about running our financial management offices. Now, we see here on the left that our board of directors is ultimately responsible for setting the strategic vision of the organization, or direction rather, of the organization. Of course, this should be informed by many other stakeholders, including organizational leadership and staff. But at the end of the day, the board is really responsible for long-term sustainability of the organization and making sure that the mission and vision are being realized as much as possible. The board is also providing this ongoing financial monitoring for us. They're really watching to make sure that we're in line with accomplishing our goals. And if not, they're helping to support us and understand how we're course correcting what we're doing instead. And again, really there to look to our long-term sustainability. So they're really thinking about safeguarding the assets of the organization as well. And they can only do that by receiving regular, accurate reports from the organization. Finally, the board is really ultimately responsible for making sure that the organization with a lot of different legislation that we have to follow, as well as, again, these promises that we're making to our funders and the communities that we're serving. Now, on the management side, this is certainly a partnership. You can see that management is very largely responsible for executing the vision and financial strategy of the organization. It's also important that management is providing complete and accurate data to our board of directors to help them inform their strategic decision making. Management is also generally responsible for actually facilitating and completing, our required forms and reports that we need to be submitting and keeping up with the board there as oversight to be reviewing and making sure that we're on track. If your organization is younger or a smaller organization, we may see a lot of crossover in these responsibilities. You may actually have what's known as a working board, where the board and management are really one at the beginning. As organizations grow, mature, get larger, we do see more of a delineation. And ideally, we've got our board really fulfilling that oversight function and not necessarily in the day-to-day management of the organization along with us. There are some options for how to fiscally staff a nonprofit organization that are important to consider. So we see them here. The first is internal staff, using internal staff to do a range of financial management activities. For instance, you could have someone in-house be your bookkeeper, right? Someone in-house who's entering all of the transactions into your accounting software. Um, you could also have financial leadership that is part of your staff, your full-time or part-time, but permanent staff at the organization. So as we see here, some of the benefits to that is when you've got your fiscal management in-house, you can check with them on what you need. You can access information when you need it right there in the office. Um, some cons may be that it might be more difficult to staff the appropriate skills at each level. Now, that goes back to thinking about strategic, managerial, and transactional levels of financial management. Depending on the size of your staff, depending on the resources available, you may not have all of those skills in-house and may need to look elsewhere. A lot of organizations actually prefer to have their fiscal management in-house just because of that quick access, if they can afford to have the right folks with the right skill sets there for the right amount of time. Another option to you is to get outsourced fiscal support. So as I was saying in our intro, BDO can actually be your back office and do all of the bookkeeping for you. We, as well as many other accounting firms and consultancies, can also help support organizations all the way up through that strategic level. You could actually outsource chief financial officer, that CFO support, if it's available to you. What's really nice about outsourced support is often you're gaining access to financial expertise that you might not have in-house, right? When you're going to an outsourced professional. Again, you can outsource your strategic, managerial, and transactional levels of financial management depending on what your needs are at the organization. You still need someone in-house to manage that outsourced relationship. I think that that is sometimes a piece of information that's overlooked when folks are trying to get things done and looking to shop out some work. You absolutely need a relationship manager, someone who's going to check the work of your outsourced support. I would say, just in short, outsourced accounting support can be really, really great when you have a great relationship and they really understand the needs of your business. I've also seen outsourced support not work well for organizations because that relationship or mutual understanding of what everyone needs is not there. Finally, I do want to talk just really briefly about fiscal sponsorship. If you are not yet a 501c3 organization, or you are new and you need some more expertise or some more help, you can actually get another nonprofit organization to be your fiscal sponsor. Now, there are multiple levels of fiscal sponsorship. I'm not going to get into them today, and it can actually be pretty complex. But in short, it might be beneficial to have another organization take on the responsibility of managing the financial work of your organization. You definitely want to vet other organizations if this is a relationship that you're interested in, and make sure that they themselves have the skill set and capacity to do this work. Another benefit of fiscal sponsorship is that if you do not have your 501c3 tax exempt status, your fiscal sponsor can actually apply for grants and receive them for the project if they are sponsoring a particular project or program that you're doing. To move into the systems space in operations, that technology piece, I just really kind of wanted to talk about all of the different systems that are out there to support you in your work. Not all of these systems are necessary at the beginning of an organization's life cycle, right? I do want to point out that when you're taking a look at the slide with all of these different systems that might help you, we really want the accounting and reporting software. For a lot of us, that is QuickBooks. It might be some other accounting software, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about accounting software. Something like QuickBooks, something like Intact, if you've heard of that. There's many out there. We want that accounting software to be our system of record for our financial data, right? And as you see here, any other softwares that you might be employing to help you with other areas of your work that include financial transactions, ideally, there is some level of integration that we can get with our accounting software. Whether that is an automatic feed, that's ideal in my opinion. The more you can take human hands out of a process and get things set up, the more likely you are to be free of error. But even if it's a download or an upload, we really want to see how well our systems can talk to each other. And then we really want to be thoughtful about what system we're keeping what information in. Again, that accounting software ideally is your system of record for your financial data, whereas your fundraising software, your fundraising database up here, we want it to be able to talk to your accounting software so that your accounting software has the transactional data of your donations, your grant funding, things like that. But it's probably better to keep your relationship management notes and things of that nature in the fundraising database, right? You have your fundraising database be your system of record for your fundraising relationship management. In terms of workflow, when we think about workflow, a question that we get asked all the time is, at what budget size should I add fiscal staff support? And often our answer is it's not really about the size of your budget. It's more about the nature of your work, the makeup of your funding. Again, government revenue is great. Government contracts and grants are great, but they're really cumbersome to manage. And often it requires more people power if you're heavily government funded. The other thing we like to point out when folks are really feeling like they can't get things done in their financial office, or things are taking a long time, or gosh, we just need more support, we need more hands, is to go ahead and take a look at the workflows that you have. If and when you have a moment, it's also really helpful to do something like this, to visually sketch it out. So this is an example of a workflow process in an organization. This is a reimbursement process that's not working quite correctly, quite well, right? So in this process, the employee who has purchased a thing for their organization is involved, their supervisor is involved, and in this organization, an accounts payable specialist. So notice that the employee has taken the steps they think they're supposed to. They have documented their purchase in whatever system they need to. They've submitted their reports with receipts to their supervisor, who looks it over and approves it. Great. And passes it over to AP. At this point, AP realizes something's missing. That's something that's missing, ideally should have been caught up here, because now what happens is AP needs to go back to the employee, and you kind of get the sense of what's happening here. So when we're thinking about fiscal staffing, not only do we want to understand really what's necessary and what are the systems that we have available to us, what are our workflows? Are they as effective and efficient as we can make them? Or do we want to tweak them and figure out a way to retrain or make something easier, for example, at the beginning of this process? And then that brings us to internal controls. This is a really big area of focus when we think about our fiscal operations. So what are internal controls? Well, I would say that internal controls are made up of the policies that you have at your organization, right? An example of a policy may be all cash receipts are entered in a timely manner. Then we have the procedures in place that are helping us comply with that policy. So if all cash receipts are entered in a timely manner, what is the process to help us get that done? Who gets the mail? Who stamps the checks? Who prepares the bank deposit and by what date? Who makes the bank deposit and so forth? So we've got policies and procedures, right? Our internal controls. We also have specific control mechanisms that we build into our procedures for checks and balances. So for instance, getting approval to make a purchase at a certain dollar level. That's a control step, right? It's a step that's going to just stop that process for a moment and check in and make sure we have the appropriate approval to move forward. So why do we need internal controls? As you see here, they're really going to help us protect our scarce resources from waste, loss, or even theft or misuse, which unfortunately is everywhere, even in the nonprofit sector. They're going to really help us make sure that we're using our resources appropriately. Someone takes a quick check and says, well, what was my budget and where are we now in our actuals? That's a control step, looking at budget variances, right? Are we using our resources the way we said we would and appropriately? And also our controls, our policies, procedures, and control steps are going to help us get data accurately into the system to begin with so that those reports that we're providing for those informed strategic decisions we want our leadership to be making are correct and produced in a timely manner. When we think about internal controls, a really big buzzword that comes up is, or buzz phrase, I should say, is segregation of duties. Chances are you have all heard this phrase, and if you haven't, now that I've said it, you're going to. So what are a segregation of duties? Well, as we see here, segregation of duties really means that no one person in an organization should be able to perform all of the functions in an accounting cycle. Well, what's an accounting cycle? Let's think about something like cash receipts. How do we take money into the organization? And that's not just dollars, cash, right? That's really any type of revenue. How are we receiving payments? What is the cycle of that? Is one person in our organization able to download transactions maybe from PayPal, or like I said, get the mail and stamp the checks that are coming in, prepare the deposit and enter it into our accounting software, make that deposit in the bank, and reconcile the bank deposit at the end of the month? If there's just one person involved in that entire process, the likelihood of there being a mistake that got made or even intentional fraud being discovered is really low, right? So we really don't want any single person to have the ability to cover up an intentional or unintentional accounting error. I'm going to just acknowledge that that's really hard in small organizations. So you really want to be thinking about, maybe I just have one or two staff people. Maybe it's just me. I'm the executive director, business manager, program director, all of it. Who else is in the organization that you can bring into a process? Maybe a board member, maybe a volunteer. Just want to be thinking about trying to get a segregation of duties wherever possible. Finally, I mentioned that we really want these segregation of duties to be occurring in all of our accounting cycles. So here are some areas of accounting cycles in your day-to-day work at a nonprofit organization where you want to be thinking about, what policies do we have in place? What procedures have we outlined to help folks follow the policy? And where are there some control steps, some checks and balances to make sure that everything is flowing the way it should be? So you can think about that again in cash receipts. How are we contracting folks with 1099s? Who's collecting all of the agreements and data that we need? Purchasing, what are our approval thresholds that we have at the organization? Who's allowed to spend money and how? How are we paying folks? Who has to sign off on a check that gets cut? And payroll. Payroll is a really big one as well. Do we have the same person that is able to enter new employees in our database, our payroll software, and pay them and put that information in the books? So just a few things, a lot today. I'm excited to answer questions. But that's it on operational excellence. I think at this point, I will pass it over to Chris to talk to us about insurance.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Johnson, and I own Johnsonese Brokerage. We are an independent insurance agency based in Chicago, and we focus on clients in the arts. So film, theater, and performing arts, music, live events, those types of clients. And some of you may have been here previously. I did a presentation for businesses in the arts, and obviously today is for nonprofits. And you might hear a lot of repetition between the two, and that's not just because I'm lazy, but insurance is determined more based on the type of work you do rather than the legal entity type that you choose to organize. So a nonprofit art gallery's insurance is going to be much more in common with a for-profit art gallery than say it's going to be with a nonprofit theater. So again, insurance is looking at more what you do, the type of work you do, and not necessarily the type of organization. So the things we're going to talk about today is first giving a definition of insurance. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's helpful to really have sort of a visceral understanding of what insurance is when you're out, shopping in the insurance world. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how the industry is organized, because that impacts who you want to talk to in the industry when you need insurance or when you have insurance questions. We'll talk about the types of insurance that your organization might need, and then we'll go through some claim scenarios, sort of things that can go wrong and how insurance can apply to those situations. And then finally, Q&A. So I'm going to give one insurance origin story, and I'm going to say up front that this is a Eurocentric example. And that insurance has been invented many times by many cultures, literally around the world. But I've chose this example because the terminology is familiar to us as Americans or as Westerners. So I think it's just an example that's easier for us to understand. So we're going to go back to 1688 and to Mr. Lloyd's coffee shop in London. And it just so happened that his coffee shop had a good view of the port. And so rich men started to gather there, and they were all men in 1688, to wait to watch the port and wait for their ships to come in. And that is where the saying comes from, waiting for your ship to come in. Remember that your ship might not come in. So what some of the ship owners thought, and what happened was, it's just like high school, right? They sat at the same table at their coffee shop every day and got to know people at their table. And so they started talking amongst themselves, and they came up with this idea. Well, if one person's ship fails to return, if we put money in a pot, they could get that pot and then be able to buy a new ship and sail for another day. If your ship sunk, you were financially ruined and actually went from being a relatively wealthy person to a poor person. And this was really an example of what we'll call financial risk sharing or financial risk transferring. So instead of me individually being 100% at risk if my boat sinks, all of us at the table decided to share that risk. Or you can also think of me transferring my risk to the group. And this was the first insurance syndicate in what we call today Lloyd's of London. And Lloyd's of London you may have heard of because they're famous for insuring unusual things like a movie star's lips or a dancer's legs or a singer's voice, that kind of thing. And then they took it a step farther, and the syndicates, the group of guys around a table, started saying, well, we could do this for other ship owners too. And with that step, modern insurance was born. At least at this time it was born. So what I want you to just think about is that insurance is financial risk transfer. You're paying someone else to take some of your financial risk. In this case, you're paying an insurance company. So think about it in your personal life. It makes it easier sometimes. So you spend a significant amount of money buying a house, right? It's the most expensive thing you'll ever buy. on any given day, that house could burn down and you would have a huge financial loss. Well, if you work with an insurance company, you pay a small amount, relatively small amount per month. And if that house burns down, they have the financial responsibility of paying to rebuild it. You've transferred that risk to the insurance company. And so I want to talk a little bit about how the insurance industry is organized, because that'll help you find the right person to talk to in the industry. And the most basic split is between personal lines and commercial lines. So personal lines you're familiar with. This is, your homeowner's insurance, your renter's insurance, your car insurance. It's insurance for an individual person or a family. Commercial lines is really insurance for a business. And nonprofits fall in the commercial side of insurance. And, a nonprofit is a business. Just the profits essentially go back into the business. And so insurance looks at it from the commercial line side of the house. So a lot of times your personal agent that you've worked with for a long time, who you really like, may not be able to help you with insurance for your organization. It's two very different worlds. And then I just want to briefly talk about how in the commercial lines insurance, it's really specialized by the industry that you work in. So for example, there are people in insurance, there are insurance companies that focus on transportation, on trucking companies, on shipping companies. There are people that focus on manufacturing, the companies that make your iPhone, the company that makes cars, that's their specialty. And there's many, many of these categories, but one of them is the arts. There are insurance companies and insurance agents who focus on the arts. And so if you're talking to your commercial agent and they still are having trouble understanding what you do or the questions you ask, it might be because they're in one of these other specialties and you may need someone in your specialty to understand what you do and understand your insurance needs. And then even with the arts, it tends to be broken down into additional categories: performing arts, visual arts, and film and television. So one of the things you just want to check when you're vetting an insurance agent is that they're familiar with your part of the world. It will just save you time and energy working with someone who knows what it is you do, understands what you do. So now we're going to dive into the commercial insurance. And again, commercial insurance applies to nonprofits in the same way that it would apply to a for-profit business. And again, here there's two major categories. Property insurance tends to be what people are more familiar with. This is insuring physical things. So when I was talking about homeowners insurance, insuring your physical home. In the business world, in the nonprofit world, you're insuring assets owned by the nonprofit. So you may have an office space, you may own office equipment, you may own other specialized equipment, that kind of thing. There we're talking about property insurance. Liability insurance has to do with when you do something that causes you do something unintentionally that causes you to own other people's money. That's liability. And the simplest example that people are usually familiar with is, let's imagine a store, a retail store, right? A clothing store. So someone comes in to shop, they trip and fall and get hurt. That's a liability claim. I'm going to argue with you that liability is the thing you need to understand more, because your liability is essentially limitless. And property is, while it's still important, is limited to the value of the property that you own. So first we'll dive a little bit into liability insurance, and then we will discuss property insurance in a little more detail. So here are some of the major categories of liability insurance. And I'm going to start right in the center. General liability insurance is the most basic insurance that almost all organizations need. And the little memory device I give people is general liability relates to the general public. So general liability covers injuries and property damage you may cause to others in the course of your operations. So, a theater or any kind of live performance is another example. Someone gets hurt going to their seat. Someone gets injured in the mosh pit in a concert. Those are general liability claims. A member of the general audience was injured. So again, this is kind of a very common type of insurance that most organizations need. Commercial auto insurance is very similar to personal auto insurance. So if you have people driving for your organization, either in rented cars or in their own cars, running errands for the organization, you may need auto liability insurance. Workers' compensation. Workers' compensation covers injuries for people paid to do work. And I chose my wording intentionally carefully there because it does cover traditional employees, W-2 employees, but in most states, in most situations, it also covers 1099 people. Here I'm talking about individuals that you hire directly to do some type of work for you. So workers' comp covers both medical costs for someone's injuries. So here you have, someone painting your set for a theater performance. They fall off a ladder and get hurt. If they're being paid to do that work, workers' compensation will pay their medical expenses. It will also pay disability, that if they're injured seriously enough to not be able to work for a period of time, it helps replace some of their lost income. You'll notice I did not say volunteers here, unpaid people. In the state of Illinois, unpaid people, volunteers, are not covered by workers' comp. That's true in some other states as well, but it's specifically true in Illinois. There's a separate coverage you can buy called volunteer accident medical for exactly that, to provide some coverage if a volunteer is injured while working for you. The more volunteers you have, the different types of work they're doing can all impact whether you need this type of coverage or not. Liquor liability is also what it sounds like. It comes from serving alcohol. And let's suppose you serve someone alcohol at, say, a gallery opening, and they get drunk and on the way home cause a major accident with major injuries. You are going to get sued for serving that person excess liability. And this is what liquor liability is intended to cover. The question we always get is, well, we're just going to give the liquor away. Well, if you're asking for donations or charging admission, that's a tough argument to make. So if you are serving alcohol and you're either charging admission, asking for donations, or charging for the drinks, you need liquor liability insurance. And I saved a key one for last. This is directors and officers liability. This is a type of insurance that tends to be more important for nonprofits because you have an all volunteer board of directors. And there are certain situations where the directors can actually be sued for their role, sued individually for their role on the board of directors. Board members can be sued for actions or decisions they've made or for inaction. It can be like things like, a grantor suing, saying that they didn't put proper financial controls in place and the funds from the grant were misused. It can be things of sexual harassment claims rising to the board level if there's significant amount of harassment that the board should have known about and should have taken action on. So if you're trying to recruit people to your board, especially wealthy people, especially attorneys, they are going to want proof that you have directors and officers liability. So I'm going to just talk briefly about property insurance because I think most people are more familiar with it. But there's a couple things you want to be aware of on your property insurance. One is called causes of loss. And this means the types of incidents that the policy covers for. There's no insurance policy that covers everything. So you want to understand what your policy covers. And on property insurance, common causes of loss are theft, fire, storms, flood, earthquake, those kinds of things. And they will actually be listed on your policy what's covered. Typically, theft and fire are always covered. Storms are covered except for, in certain cases, named storm, which means tropical storms and hurricanes. So probably not an issue if you're in Chicago, but if you were, a fine art nonprofit participating in a show in Florida, you might want to check your policy to see if you have hurricane coverage. Floods are typically not covered by a base policy, and that coverage has to be purchased separately. Earthquake coverage typically has to be purchased separately. And terrorism coverage is optional on most policies. And terrorism coverage is what you think 9/11 type events. So, and then one last thing I'll point out on property insurance is valuation is also important. If something is destroyed, is stolen, it's gone, how is that value going to be determined on that thing that was taken or destroyed in a fire? And there's two major categories that are common: replacement costs and actual cash value. Replacement cost is actually going to try to essentially pay you what you originally paid for the object. So I bought an expensive video camera for $10,000 5 years ago. If I have replacement cost coverage, I'm going to get $10,000 to replace that camera. If I have actual cash value, they're going to say, okay, that thing is 5 years old. After 5 years, it's only worth $3,000, and I'm going to get $3,000. So these are going to have a big impact on any payout you might get. And so you want to understand those, what is on your policy and what that means for you in the event of a claim. There's some less common ones that I'll point out just because these are relevant to people in the fine art world. So if we have any fine art nonprofits, then you might have agreed value, market value, or consigned value. And the difference can be huge. Typically, consigned value is half of market value. And so you need to understand what valuation applies to your policy. All right, I just want to point out one strange little coverage that always blows people's minds, that it shows up on their policy and they're like, what the hell is inland marine and why do I have it on my policy? The short answer is it's just a category of insurance. If you want to know a little bit more where the name came from, when we were talking earlier about people insuring ships, so the very first insurance, some of the very first insurance companies were marine insurance. They only insured ships. When they started to diversify and started offering insurance on land, they brilliantly called it inland marine insurance. And the title, we've been stuck with it for hundreds of years. It's just a category of coverage, but things that you may have in your arts nonprofits, like fine art coverage falls under inland marine coverage, camera and lighting equipment, costumes and props. There's a lot of other things in there that might not be relevant to you that also fall into it. And so things that apply to everyone, like laptops and phones, also fall in this category. The other big thing about inland marine insurance is that it's not tied to a specific location. Like my desk is only insured at my office. If I decide to carry it out and use it on the street corner and it gets hit by a car, it's not insured because it wasn't at my office. Under inland marine insurance, fine art is insured if you send it out to a client for approval or you take it to an art fair. Costumes and props are insured if your show is touring to 5 different theaters, that kind of thing. So this is just a heads up. If you see that term on your policy, don't panic. It just is a category of insurance. All right, now what I think of as the fun part of the presentation are claim scenarios, and it's just because these sort of help bring real world examples to what we're talking about. So the first one I'm going to say is while you're painting mural, so your nonprofit is painting a mural on the side of the building, and your crane hits the window of a neighboring business and breaks the window. So obviously this person is going to expect you to pay for their window, and maybe even more if they had to close their business until the window could be patched up. So what coverage applies here? Well, that's going to be general liability insurance. Remember the memory device general relates to the general public, someone not part of your organization, not working with your organization. So in this case, the neighboring business is certainly the general public. They have nothing to do with you. They just happen to be, located next to where you were working. So this would be a general liability claim. Let's see. All right, a student in your art class severely cuts their hand, requiring an emergency room visit and minor surgery. This would be a participant accident medical claim. And you'll remember previously we talked about volunteer accident medical. This is a similar type coverage, except it's targeted specifically participants, people participating in your programs, not employees, not volunteers that are doing work, students taking a class, that type of thing. And so you need to understand when you buy accident medical coverage, who it's covering. Is it covering your volunteers? Is it covering your program participants? All right. Scenario 3. The night after your successful opening, your gallery is robbed by thieves posing as a cleaning crew. Thousands of dollars worth of art that you just sold is taken. So what line of insurance is going to cover here? That is inland marine. And that's where we're talking about the category of coverages. It covers things in multiple locations, and fine art falls into that category. And this also relates back to my my talk about valuation, because you'll notice that this art was already sold. Someone came into the gallery that day and bought $50,000 painting. They don't take it immediately. So valuation is going to determine whether you get $50,000 to reimburse that client, or you only get $25,000. So again, two things that are important: one, that you have the coverage, and two, that you understand the valuation on that coverage. All right, scenario 4. Lightning strikes a nearby electrical transformer and you lose power. You are forced to cancel your annual fundraiser. So what would apply here? And this is an insurance we haven't talked about previously, but it's another one I want to point out to you because nonprofits tend to do a lot of events. And if you think about it, you invest most of the money up front in an event, and then you get your money back either through ticket sales, or if it's a fundraiser, through donations. Well, what happens if that event can't happen because something out of your control? In this case, you don't have electricity. So the lightning didn't even hit your building, but still you have to cancel your event because you don't have electricity. You can get event cancellation insurance that will actually pay you some money if your event has to be canceled, so that you can make up some of your losses for the event. All kinds of weather events can lead to cancellation. It could be snow, it could be a tornado, all those things. So something you want to think about when you have major events coming up that would put a major hole in your budget if they were canceled. Scenario 5. So while you're driving to an art fair, a gallery assistant hits a gas station canopy with the roof of a rental truck. This one's probably pretty obvious. It's auto liability insurance. But a couple things I want to point out is that auto liability for your organization can cover rented vehicles. This is most likely a rented truck. It can cover that. It can also cover people driving their personal vehicles. If this person instead were transporting the art in their personal car and caused an accident, it could also apply. I also like this example because it happens a lot. We get a lot of claims of people driving some kind of small truck and hitting the canopy at a gas station just because they're not used to driving such a big truck, and they don't think about the canopy. They're only looking at the cars around them. And also remember that liability pays to third parties. So here, the person collecting money is not you, it's the gas station. Your insurance is going to pay the gas station to repair their canopy. All right. Scenario 6, just as the house lights go out, an audience member trips, going to their seat and breaks their finger. They have a $1,200 emergency bill for x-rays and setting their finger. This is not a crazy thing. This happens often, that people get injured going to their seats, especially if you think about theater. The audience tends to skew older, and when the lights go out, people tend to rush in. So you have older people trying to get through a crowded space they're not familiar with in lower light conditions. So things like this do happen. And so here, this is also a general liability claim. Audience members are considered the general public. They're not part of your organization. They've not signed up for a long-term program. They're there for a couple hours to participate, to watch your show. People attending a gallery opening would be the general public. And so general liability is going to apply here. And you'll see that I've used quite a few examples of when general liability shows up. That's why it's one of the most basic coverages that all organizations, for profit and nonprofit, should have. All right. A paid dancer breaks their leg after falling over a prop that someone left in the wrong location. They can't work for 8 weeks. So there's a couple important things here. One, this person is paid. They're not a volunteer. They're not a participant in a dance class. They're a paid dancer. And two, not only does this person have medical expenses for their broken leg, but they also can't work for 8 weeks. This is a workers' comp scenario. Workers' comp is going to pay for their medical expenses, so their hospital visits, if they had to have surgery, whatever. And it's also going to help pay for their lost income over those 8 weeks, so that the person can, still eat and pay their bills while they're unable to work. All right. A volunteer taking tickets slips on spilled soda and breaks 3 teeth. Hopefully you've guessed this one, the volunteer accident medical. Again, accident medical is for people who aren't covered by workers' comp, and there's specific categories of coverage that you want to make sure you have the right categories of coverage, volunteers, participants, that type of thing. All right. So after a summer theater camp, a camper tells their parent that a teacher touched them inappropriately. This is not a coverage that we discussed previously, but it's really important for any organization working with children. And it is the very appropriately titled abuse and molestation coverage. It covers exactly what it says. It covers if you are sued for a child claiming abuse and molestation. And this can be by your employees, by your volunteers. So you also want to make sure that the definition of this coverage covers the type of people that you're worried about. And in the scenario, I said a child claimed it. And the reason that's important is because it doesn't have to have happened for the insurance to apply. If you're just accused, the insurance pays for defense costs. And that's also true with general liability insurance. So you don't have to do anything wrong to have to need insurance to defend yourself against a false claim. So that's important to keep in mind with insurance as well. All right, I think this is the last one. So your bartender doesn't notice that a patron is rapidly buying drinks. On their way home, they cause a serious accident. The victims sue you. Why do they sue you? They sue you for serving someone more than you should have. They claim you're responsible for that person being drunk, which led to their accident. And this one is pretty obvious as well as liquor liability. But just trying to point out the importance of liquor liability if you're going to be serving liquor for money in your organization. It's really important. All right, that is my presentation. Jess, I'll give it back to you.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much. I want to invite folks on the call now, whether for Julian, for Chris, or for both of our wonderful presenters today. What are the questions that you have? We know this is a lot of information. Some of it may be more and less relevant to your particular arts discipline, but what are the things you're chewing on? We really want to hear from you. Feel free to use the chat or the Q&A or both. And I see we actually already have one question about sort of the difference between specific policies and that general liability insurance. So I'll just go ahead and read that out loud. And then I'll direct this one to you, Chris. So it sounds like this person is asking for, in the case of an example of a hands-on art workshop that members of the public pay to participate, would injuries be covered by general liability, or would you need a specific medical policy or specific event-based policy for something like that in addition?
That's a really good question. And the answer is a little bit of both. You could go with just a general liability policy. I will say that I didn't give my full memory device in trying to save time. So general liability, the second word is liability. Liability means you're legally responsible for something that happened. And so for general liability to cover, the accident would have had to have been your fault. If you purchase participant accident medical coverage, then the person is just covered if they get injured at your event, even if, it was clearly their fault and not your, nothing that you did wrong. And so that can be beneficial just because it saves you dealing with that kind of situation of having to defend yourself, whether you were legally liable for a person's injury or not. Under a participant accident medical, it would be automatically covered. So I would recommend having both, but obviously we also say about insurance, you buy as much insurance as you need, or you buy as much insurance as you can afford if it's less than that. And so if you can only afford general liability, you have the most serious coverage that you need. Generally, if there's a serious injury, a major injury, somehow it's going to be that you get blamed for it. So if you have to go forward with just general liability, you could, but I would recommend having the participant accident medical as well. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it sounds like John is responding in the chat. That was helpful. So keep those questions coming, y'all. Maybe I'll ask a question to both of you, Jillian and Chris. So this is obviously a lot of these kind of operational and insurance considerations that you're sharing with our participants today are really helpful for thinking about when starting out, or maybe even starting a new additional program or additional exhibit, right? These are the insurance policies we might want to have purchased before we expand into something new, or again, before we sort of launch our nonprofit. I am curious for the two of you, when you're talking to folks who maybe have started their organizations, who maybe are in that younger, newer stage and are thinking about expansion, what are the things that you really think are important for folks to think about maybe after they've gotten an initial sort of operations framework set out for their arts nonprofit, or perhaps they've started with purchasing general liability insurance and they're starting to grow a little more and thinking about sort of phase 2 of their organization. What are the things that you talk to people about for sort of after they've started out?
I'll start it. So yeah, this presentation was definitely sort of targeted more at newer organizations, but for established organizations, one of the rules of thumb I would say is anytime you start doing something new, just call your agent and say, hey, heads up, we're doing, we launched this new type of program, we're expanding to a new site, whatever it is, and so that they can look at it and say, okay, well, you really need to think about this or that type of coverage. So that's the one thing I would say. Anytime there's a new initiative, expansion, even, hopefully it doesn't happen, but contraction type of thing, talk to your agent to see, what they would recommend for that specific situation. But one of the things I didn't talk about at all is that if your nonprofit mission is actually providing a service, then you may want to consider a coverage called professional liability that's really targeted at ensuring your services, that if someone sues you saying you failed to provide your promoted service, or you did something wrong in providing that service, that's professional liability insurance. It's also called errors and omissions insurance. So that is what's important if you're in providing a service. And then another thing that we didn't touch on at all, but if your organization is big enough, that you have, a number of employees, or you're trying to grow and recruit more employees, you may want to think about employee benefits, things like health insurance, disability insurance, benefits that you provide to your employees that helps you recruit people and helps you retain people within the organization. So that becomes more and more important. Employee benefits become more and more important as you become a larger organization and you're trying to be a sustainable organization with, employees that are making a career with your company, as opposed to, more of a transient employer that people come and go. So those are a couple important things.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. And thanks, Chris. I think from a fiscal operations place, I would say to new, young, and small organizations to document what they're doing. I think that that's something that is so easy to overlook because it's not your mission work, right? It's not the place where you want to spend your small amount of time that you have. But I think that as you grow and develop as an organization, it gets harder and harder and harder to go back and document those policies and procedures, even down to like what decisions were made in a team meeting. So really starting to write down, even if you only have 2 or 3 people, how are we moving through this process so that it can continue to evolve and grow. And then once you do write it down, come back to it regularly. Check and see if your documented policies and procedures are still appropriate and reflecting what you're doing. They become really, really critical training tools as you're bringing new people into the organization. So that's just one of a ton of things I can think about for new organizations. I think it's a neat question.
Thanks to you both. One question from Todd in the chat, and I want to just make sure I understand this right. So hopefully when I summarize, I get the gist of your question, Todd, but if not, please feel free to chime in and let me know if this is what you're getting at. So it sounds like Todd is someone who actually doesn't have a formal nonprofit quite yet, but is beginning to build out some performance events with sounds like the hopes of building a nonprofit organization in the future. Todd, maybe I'll just plug that we have a lot of really amazing programs from earlier in the summer in June, all about starting a nonprofit. So I'll share a link to those recordings in just a couple minutes. But are there operations or insurance, sort of the flip side of my last question to you both, that you would recommend for someone who actually has not even formed an organization or a formal nonprofit incorporation quite yet? What are the things that someone should think about for that sort of pre-nonprofit stage?
It's a really great question. From an operations perspective, I would probably say as you're ideating about what your future nonprofit will be doing, who you'll be serving, how you'll be serving them, I would encourage you to also think about the business model that you anticipate for that organization. So as you're doing research and thinking about what it is you want to do, and therefore, how will it get funded? What will the types of expenses be in our organization? That business model is really going to help inform a series of other choices that you're going to make and how you're going to set up your operations. For instance, maybe you are going to start a nonprofit, with an arts focus, but is really concentrating in social services. Maybe you want to do arts therapy or arts education for a particular constituency, and there's a lot of, I'm going to bring up government funding again, because it's such a good example. And you're starting to look into it and you think that potentially there might be some government contracts that you can get to fund this work. You got to think about what compliance level you're going to need there versus maybe the work that you're going to be it's going to be self-funded at the start, or you have a list of individual donors that you think are going to be really excited about this work. What are they going to require of you? How will you need to report to them and think about what it is that you've promised in this partnership? Those types of questions are going to help you also think through what are the people, systems, and workflows that I'm going to need in my finance office to support not just the work, but those funding relationships, and make sure that I'm getting the financial data that I need to all the right constituents.
All right, I'll jump in for a second. So in terms of, what I kind of talked about in the beginning, to a certain extent, insurance doesn't care too much about what your legal entity status is. They care about the work that you're doing. And so if you're doing theater productions or dance performances as an individual producing those events versus a nonprofit producing them, your insurance needs are going to be very similar. But I will say the one thing you can do if you're sort of, in that temporary space between being an individual and being a nonprofit, is that you can do short-term insurance. And most insurance policies, probably what you're familiar with personal insurance, are annual policies. So they run for 12 months, and at the end of 12 months, you can renew it for another 12 months. You can also do short-term policies targeted to the length of some specific thing. So let's say you're doing one performance and it's running, for 3 weeks. You could buy a 3-week insurance policy just to cover those performances. So I would say that's something that you might, consider in that sort of pre-space before you get your nonprofit in place. You could certainly do annual insurance as well if you know it's going to be, a meaningful period of time before you get your legal nonprofit set up. But you might want to think about short-term insurance in the meantime. Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Chris and Jillian. I'm going to move us to close. I'm sure we have other folks who have questions or things they're wondering about. I really encourage you to join us for future programs where we'll continue to dig into some of the key kind of thorny issues and questions that the experts on our panels and also the fellow creatives who are attending these workshops might have some answers and some support for. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. I want to share a couple of resources with you before you head out. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, is the last day in our Expanding Your Creative Nonprofit series. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have, which is about financial management and scenario planning. And you can sign up at the link that I'm about to drop into the chat. As I mentioned, we also have another program next week focused on conversations about equity in our financial management as arts organizations. That is going to be a really important and interesting conversation, especially in light of a lot of the reckoning that arts organizations have been going through over the last couple of years since the uprisings in 2020. So I invite you to join us at that program next Wednesday. Finally, these programs are really here for all of you. And that means we want to hear about what you enjoyed and what we can be doing better. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a survey form. We would love your feedback about the things that you really enjoyed about this program, as well as the things that you want to see from the help desk in the future. So we really encourage you to use that form to let us know how you are feeling. We look forward to seeing you at a future help desk program. Thank you again to our wonderful presenters, as well as to our interpreters today. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.